Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 677, and today is September 26th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Got a good amount of news to talk about in today's show, some really big and important stories to get into and break down. So, to share the show, it is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. Of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And the best place to follow me to get all my work is on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _. Also want to take a minute to mention the sponsor of the podcast, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2024, which is an online event put on by Mikhail Thorup, a highly sought after expat consultant. Now, this event is being held from October 7th through the 11th, so it's coming up in just a few weeks here, and you need to go and get your ticket. For a complimentary ticket, you could just go to expatmoneysummit.com. Again, that's expatmoneysummit.com, or you could follow the affiliate link in the show notes page wherever you're listening to the show. For a VIP ticket to the event, you can get that for $100 off by using the promo code Kyle, Kyle, when you check out. There's a great lineup of speakers at the event, including Scott Horton, Tom Woods, and Ron Paul. Myself, Dave DeCamp, and Hervoya Morik will be on a panel, a VIP panel about World War III. Is it just fear-mongering or genuine concern? So again, head on over to expatmoneysummit.com and get your tickets to this massive, awesome event. All right, with that, let's get into the news today. The first story here I wrote for the Institute on September 25th. NATO prepares for mass transport of wounded soldiers. As the North Atlantic Alliance ramps up its preparations for war with Brussels is considering how it might remove a large number of wounded NATO soldiers from the front lines should conflict with Moscow break out. So, Lieutenant General Alexander Solfrank, the head of NATO's Logistics Command, discussed the plans with Reuters. He said the challenge would be swiftly ensuring high-quality care for, in the worst case, a great number of wounded. Solfrank believes that NATO will be unable to have air superiority over the front lines in the conflict with Moscow. He said the bloc is considering using hospital trains and buses to move the wounded soldiers. He explained, for plenty of reasons, all options to take a great number of wounded to medical installations need to be considered, which includes trains but potentially also buses. At the end of the Cold War, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, war between Russia and NATO was unthinkable. However, over the past 3 decades, the North Atlantic Alliance has expanded up to Russia's borders. At the start of the Joe Biden administration, Washington and Brussels began treating Kiev as a de facto member of the alliance. The ties between Ukraine and NATO provoked the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Throughout the war in Ukraine, the West has steadily increased its support for Ukraine. The Kremlin has increasingly viewed itself in direct conflict with the West. President Biden is considering giving Ukraine the green light to conduct long-range attacks inside of Russia with American weapons, or British weapons with American components. The Russian president, that's Vladimir Putin, has warned that if the White House approves the attack, it would mean direct war with NATO. And so we are getting very close to the point where this, logistical capability to carry a large number of wounded soldiers from the front lines could really be something that NATO is looking to implement. We are getting very close to direct Russia-NATO warfare. And so this is probably and should be one of the top concerns of NATO, what they're going to do with their wounded soldiers once this war that they have provoked by increasing support from Ukraine eventually breaks out. It's really concerning to me that these discussions are being had. This is, an interview that happened with Reuters, and there's really no discussion on how we could possibly avert World War III. All the discussion is centered around of what we're going to do when it happens. And of course, I think that's the wrong approach to take. We should be, the fact that we are having these plans for what we're going to do in the event of a mass casualty event of American NATO soldiers on the front lines in a war against Ukraine means we should really just be having discussions about what we need to do to prevent a war between Russia and Ukraine. But the exact opposite is happening, and it doesn't seem there's really any concern among any leaders in the West, maybe a little bit with Germany, occasionally with Biden, of wanting to curtail the war and are really concerned about this a potential for a war and maybe even a nuclear war to break out. We have this story here from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on September 25th. Putin orders changes to nuclear doctrine in major warning to the rest. So Putin on Wednesday outlined changes that will be made to Russia's nuclear doctrine as the US and NATO consider supporting long-range Ukrainian strikes inside of Russia. Putin said in a meeting with the Russian Security Council that the new doctrine, an attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state that's supported by a nuclear-armed power, will be treated as a joint attack. This is a clear reference to Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory that use NATO weapons and intelligence. Based on Putin's comments, it's unclear if it means such an attack would trigger a nuclear response, but the new doctrine will allow for the use of nuclear weapons in response to conventional attacks that pose a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty. According to TASS, the new doctrine will also allow for the use of nuclear weapons in response to aggression against Russia or Belarus, and if Russia becomes aware of plans to launch massive airstrikes against its territory. So TASS reported reliable information about massive takeoff of strategic or tactical planes towards Russia or the launch of cruise missiles, drones, hypersonic weapons towards its territory may be interpreted as a significant reason for a nuclear response by Moscow. The new language is more vague than Russia's current nuclear doctrine, which allows for the use of nuclear weapons in, quote, response to the use of nuclear or other types of weapons of mass destruction against it and or its allies, as well as the event of aggression against the Russian Federation with the use of conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is in jeopardy. And so in the past, Russia's nuclear doctrine basically came down to we will use nuclear weapons in response, and we will use nuclear weapons if the Russian state is existentially threatened. Now it's just the Russians will have the ability to use their nuclear weapons if there is major attacks conducted on Russia. And there's really no good, existential threat isn't maybe the most clear of standards, but it's clear that there is a very high bar if you're talking about existential. And so something like the invasion of Kursk could never be interpreted as an existential threat to the Russian state. However, if under this new language, it certainly seems like something like the attack on Kursk would be interpreted as something that Russia could issue a nuclear threat response to. So the U.S. has supported Ukraine's attack on Kursk, which came just a few months after President Biden gave Ukraine the green light to use U.S. weapons on the Russian border region. But the Biden administration is still holding out on supporting long-range strikes. Putin has said that if the U.S. supports long-range Ukrainian strikes inside Russian territory, it would mean NATO is at war with Russia. Despite the clear warning and risk of nuclear war, Ukrainian President Zelensky and many hawks in the U.S. and Europe are pushing hard for the escalation. And again, there's all these people pushing hard for the escalation, but the counterpoint to that is just we're not going to undertake this particular escalation. There's almost no debate about really reducing the threat of nuclear war and the direct war between Russia and the U.S. And in fact, it looks like this is getting even worse as the U.S. has announced another weapons package to Ukraine. So the Pentagon announced on Wednesday a new $375 million arms package for the Ukraine that includes cluster bombs, HIMARS ammunition, artillery rounds, anti-tank weapons, and other military equipment. U.S. officials told the Associated Press on Tuesday that the package will include an undisclosed number of medium-range air-to-ground cluster bombs. The Pentagon listed the weapons as air-to-ground munitions. Cluster bombs are banned by over 100 countries due to their indiscriminate nature, but the U.S. has been pouring them into Ukraine last year. The U.S. has sent 155mm artillery shells packed with cluster bombs, a cluster variant of ATACMS missiles, and now a form of widely banned bomb that can be fired by Ukrainian fighter jets. Cluster bombs scatter small submunitions over large areas, making them especially hazardous for civilians. Some munitions that don't immediately explode on impact can kill and maim civilians for decades to come, as they have in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, where the U.S. dropped hundreds of millions of bomblets during the Vietnam War. So according to the Pentagon press release, the full $375 million arm package includes air-to-ground munitions, ammunition for HIMARS, 155 millimeter and 105 millimeter artillery ammunition, TOW missiles, Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems, M1117 armored security vehicles, mine-resistant ambush-protected MRAP vehicles, light tactical vehicles, armored bridging systems, small arms, patrol boats, demolitions equipment and munitions, spare parts, ancillary equipment, services, training, and transportation. So Dave wraps up his article here saying the package will be provided through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the U.S. to send weapons straight from U.S. stockpiles. The Pentagon also released a fact sheet that said the U.S. has committed $56.3 billion in weapons and other military equipment to Ukraine since the Russian invasion was launched in February of 2022, and that number is likely quite a bit higher. All right, let's shift on to the Middle East here, where tensions between Israel and Lebanon continue to increase. This one from Dave DeCamp, September 25th, antiwar.com. Israeli military chief preparing for ground offensive in Lebanon. So the Lieutenant General Hendriz Halvali, Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces IDF, said Wednesday that the Israeli military was preparing for a potential ground offensive in Lebanon. He told a group of IDF soldiers that their military boots will enter enemy territory and said that Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon are part of the preparations for a ground invasion. He said, according to the Times of Israel, "You can hear the planes above. We are attacking all day, both to prepare the area for the possibility of your entry into Lebanon and also to continue causing blows to Hezbollah." Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Lebanon on Wednesday, killing at least 72 people and wounding 392, according to the Lebanese health minister. The latest violence brings the total number of people killed by Israel in Lebanon this week to just over 600. The health minister said that the overwhelming majority of, if not all, of the 558 people killed on Monday were civilians. Hezbollah has fired hundreds of rockets into Israel in response and has fired ballistic missiles at Tel Aviv on Wednesday, its deepest attacks yet. Israel said it intercepted the missile, which Hezbollah said targeted the headquarters of Mossad, which is the Israeli equivalent to the CIA. So the chief of staff of the IDF referenced the ballistic missile attack in his comments about potential ground invasion of Lebanon, saying, "Today we do not stop." Hezbollah today expanded the range of its fire. Later today, it will receive a very strong response. Today, we will continue. We do not stop. We continue to attack, continue to strike them everywhere. The goal is very clear: to return the displaced residents of the north safely. To do this, we are preparing the ground maneuver. According to the Israeli media reports, the U.S. is in talks with Israel on a potential pause in attacks against Lebanon. Since October 7, 2023, U.S. weapons shipments and other support for Israel have emboldened Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to escalate in Lebanon and elsewhere in the region. And so it does seem that if any major conflict breaks out, the U.S. is really signaling that it's going to be on board with backing Israel 100% here. This one, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, December 25th. U.S. deploys dozens of troops to Cyprus amid Israel's escalations in Lebanon. So the U.S. has deployed dozens of troops to Cyprus amid Israel's dramatic escalation of its bombing campaign in Lebanon, CNN reported on Wednesday. U.S. officials said the troops are preparing for a range of contingencies, including the possibility of helping evacuate U.S. citizens from Lebanon. The UK announced it's sending 700 troops to Cyprus to evacuate British nationals. Earlier this week, the Pentagon announced that the U.S. was deploying more troops to the region, but didn't specify how many. On Wednesday, the Pentagon insisted it wasn't directly supporting Israel's attacks on Lebanon, but said it would defend Israel if necessary. And that is a way of assisting Israel's attacks, right? If there's a conflict conflict between two parties, right? And then there's a much more powerful party that isn't directly involved, but every time one of the two parties, let's say party A attempts to attack party B, if, the much bigger party intervenes to prevent that attack, or is even threatening to intervene to prevent that attack, then you are playing a role and you are assisting party B, even if you're not directly having your boots on the ground or anything like that, as the US is going to argue. So the Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh said, the support that you are seeing when it comes to U.S. forces in the region is for now own force protection, and we should need to come to the defense of Israel like we saw from that large-scale attack from Iran. The U.S. is going to do that. So that's basically the U.S. policy, that we're not intervening yet, but we will if Israel needs it. Singh was referencing when the U.S. directly intervened to defend Israel from Iranian missiles and drones in April, an attack provoked by the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus, Syria. Singh also claimed that the conflict in the region is still contained to Gaza, despite Israel unleashing one of the heaviest single-day bombings of the century in Lebanon on Monday, which killed over 500 people, mostly civilians. Singh said, we still believe right now the conflict has been contained to Gaza. There are no questions that there are higher tensions in the region. There are no questions that there's been an increase in the border clashes on the northern border. And this is the typical propaganda from the Joe Biden administration. I recently wrote in a Libertarian Institute News Dispatch, a newsletter that I put out that you could, by the way, sign up for at thelibertarianinstitute.com. But, one of my arguments in there is that the Biden administration has tried to, portray this as a time of peace in the Middle East, and that we're working towards peace in the Middle East. And in reality, U.S. soldiers have come under attack hundreds of times since October 7th, with 3 killed and scores wounded. International shipping has been ground to a halt in the Red Sea. Iran has carried out attacks directly on Israel. The Houthis in Yemen have carried out attacks directly on Israel, successfully striking Tel Aviv. And so to downplay what is happening in the region is completely insane and a very bold act of propaganda from the White House. So when pressed on how she could believe that since civilians have been killed in Lebanon, Singh said, it's not that we would characterize an all-out full-scale regional war. What you're seeing is a trade of fires back and forth on that northern border. I point to you on October 8th when Hezbollah started launching those. We're seeing this widen out into a regional conflict. And so not only is she going to not say, like, as long as we don't have a full-blown war between Lebanon and Israel, then, we're not going to count it as an escalation, which is just a complete lie and completely insane. But she's also pinning on the escalations on Hezbollah when it's been pretty clearly Israel this whole time that's conducting the more provocative operations, such as conducting multiple strikes in Beirut, 3 this week, before you even had Hezbollah hit Tel Aviv once, assassinations of top Hezbollah figures, top Hamas figures in Beirut, attacks on civilian infrastructure, the mass killing of civilians. It's pretty clear which side is really escalating the tensions here. So Singh insisted the Biden administration was pushing for a diplomatic solution in Lebanon, but the continued U.S. military aid and promises to defend Israel is continuing to embolden Netanyahu, making sure the fighting does not stop. All right, let's do an update on Gaza now. Israel sends truck full of bodies of unidentified Palestinians into Gaza. So Israel sent a truck full of 88 dead Palestinians into the Gaza Strip on Wednesday and provided no information about their identities or how they were killed or died. Gaza's health ministry is demanding answers from Israel and refused to bury the bodies before they were identified. The health ministry said in a statement that it suspended the procedure for taking the bodies until, quote, all data and information about the bodies are completely identified, their owners and their names, considering this to be a minimum rights of these people and their families. So the ministry called on international aid organizations, including the Red Cross, to help get information from Israel. The ministry said, "We also emphasize the necessity of receiving the bodies according to humanitarian and international standards in a manner that preserves the rights and dignities of the owners of these bodies." Middle East Eye reported that the truck driver who entered Gaza from the Karim Shalom crossing was not allowed to enter the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis and was told to go back to Israel. Israel has sent hundreds of decomposed and unidentifiable bodies into Gaza over the past year. Gaza health officials said the truck sent into Gaza on Wednesday was the fifth one. On August 2nd, a truck carrying 90 bodies entered the strip. The health ministry said they were returned as bones and decomposed bodies in an inhumane manner. Also on Wednesday, the health ministry said the number of Palestinians killed by the Israeli assault since October 7th has now reached 41,495. The toll is considered an undercount since it doesn't include the 10,000 Palestinians who've been reported missing and are presumed dead under the rubble. And also it doesn't count a lot of the people who are dying in Israeli prisons, such as these 88. I'm guessing that's where they ended up coming from. They were people that Israel had in their torture facilities and then killed them there. And so they sent them back to Gaza once a bunch of them pile up, I suppose. All right, last story up here today. Trump pushes narrative that Iran is trying to kill him. So on Wednesday, former President Donald Trump pushed a narrative being spread by U.S. intelligence officials that Iran is trying to kill him, even though there's no evidence of Iranian involvement in either attempt on his life. The campaign said that they were briefed on the alleged Iranian threat by officials from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which is led by Avril Haines. So Trump wrote on X after the briefing, "Big threats on my life by Iran. The entire U.S. military is watching and waiting. Moves were already made by Iran that didn't work out, but they will try again. Not a good situation for anyone. I am surrounded by more men, guns, and weapons than I had ever been before." The claim that Iran is planning to kill Trump was first made by CNN back in July following the assassination attempt by Thomas Matthew Crutz, who was shot and killed by the Secret Service. The report acknowledged that there was no evidence Crutz was linked to Iran, which was affirmed on Tuesday by intelligence officials speaking to the New York Times, who stressed there was no Iranian connection to the July shooting. The Times also reported there was no evidence that Iran was connected in any way to Ryan Ruth, who was arrested on September 15th and recently charged with attempting to assassinate Trump. Ruth is a staunch supporter of the Ukraine proxy war and traveled to the country to help recruit fighters for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. And so I think I have an idea of what's going on here from the White House's perspective and why Avril Haines gave this briefing to the Trump administration. So there's now been two assassination attempts on Trump's life in the past couple of months. And so this is, at least the first one, a huge failure on the part of the Secret Service and should be considered a huge embarrassment for the White House. I mean, just imagine how much of a scandal it would have been if there was a shot taken at Biden during the Trump administration. I think there would have been a lot of Democrats and a lot of people in the corporate press pointing the finger at Trump, suggesting maybe he even allowed the shooting to happen, or at the very least, his negligence and inability to govern almost ended up in the killing of his political opponent, which would have been Joe Biden. And so there's that. The second thing is, I think it's pretty clear that the 8 years now of the left calling Trump a Nazi. I shouldn't say the left. I should say the Democrats, the Democratic establishment, calling Trump a Nazi, saying is a threat to democracy, that, blacks, immigrants, women's won't have rights under a Trump administration. Just all of the hyperbolic and over sensationalized rhetoric has, I think, created a sense of Trump is a new Hitler. And so if you have young men with no to little prospects in life. The first shooter, Krutz, I think really falls into this category. I think it's pretty easy to see how the president and vice president, and again, the Democratic Party's rhetoric about Trump, their hyperbolic rhetoric about Trump, could radicalize somebody to take a shot at Donald Trump. And so this again is a way to shift blame away from Harris, who keeps calling Trump an extremist and keeps warning about how he's enacting these extremist abortion bans across the country and all these other ridiculous talking points. And I think that probably is contributing to the fact that people are taking shots at Donald Trump, and this is a way to shit the blame onto Iran. And of course, Trump is a big idiot, and so when he hears that Iran is after his life, he's going to take that and just run with it and not realize that he's, I think, being played here by the White House. So back to Dave's article. Despite the lack of evidence, Trump suggested at a campaign event on Wednesday that Iran might have been involved in the 2 assassination attempts. He said, "As you know, there have been 2 assassination attempts on my life that we know of, and they may or may not involve, but possibly do Iran. If I were president, I would inform the threatening country, in this case Iran, that if you do anything to harm this person, we are going to blow your largest cities and country itself into smithereens," Trump said. The claims about Iran come amid soaring tensions in the Middle East as Israel has dramatically escalated its bombing campaign in Lebanon, a situation that could possibly turn into a full-blown war between the U.S. and Iran, but Iran's actions over the past show they're not interested in a war with the U.S. And so that's another really important point here. This obviously is false because Iran knows this would provoke a direct war with the United States if they killed even presidential candidate Donald Trump. And what would that benefit Iran to kill Donald Trump? It would almost be doing the Democrats a favor who are currently in power. The Republicans, I don't see a very deep bench there. I don't see anyone with the charisma, the personality, the following of Donald Trump. And so certainly you would think that would hurt their re-election chances, at least for 2024, if not beyond. And so why would why would Iran do this? What do they see the benefit? Obviously, there is the assassination attempt on the life of General Qasem Soleimani during the Trump administration when they killed him, actually, in January of 2022 at the Baghdad airport in Iraq. But even then, Iran responded to that. Right. They had their attack on the U.S. base in Iraq, and they showed at the time that they didn't want direct confrontation with the U.S. So this really just doesn't make any sense. Now, I think this has a little bit of a Russiagate style repercussion that we could see here, where the Democrats, again, invent a lie about a third country. With the Russia thing, they believed their own lies, and that led to the war in Ukraine. In this case, Trump was believing their lies. So if he's reelected president, I do think this definitely increases the chances of a war in Ukraine. I also think it makes it more difficult for the Biden administration to get a deal done in Gaza before the elections, because, of course, the Trump administration is going to use that and this together and say, oh, look, the Biden administration is cutting deals with the Iranian proxies in the region while they're trying to assassinate Donald Trump. And so this just seems to be a huge blunder for the White House and for Middle East regions going into the future. So, for example, when Iran launched its reprisal attack in Israel in response to the bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Iranian officials said they warned the U.S. 72 hours in advance. So why would they do that and at the same time also try to assassinate Donald Trump? Just it made zero sense, and this whole thing seems like a big stupid lie cooked up by the Biden administration. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with one more show this week.